The domain controller installation and promotion process has two steps. First, you need to install the files that the domain controller role uses. You do this by using Server Manager to install the ADDS role. At the end of the initial installation process, you have installed the ADDS files, but not yet configured ADDS on the server. To configure ADDS, you use the Active Directory Domain Services Configuration Wizard. You start the wizard by clicking the ADDS link in Server Manager. The wizard allows you to do one of the following. Add a domain controller to an existing domain. Add a new domain to an existing forest. Add a new forest. Before installing a new domain controller, you need to answer the questions in the following table. Questions and comments. Are you installing a new forest, a new tree, or an additional domain controller for an existing domain? Answering this question determines what additional information you might need, such as the parent domain name. What is the DNS name for the ADDS domain? When you create the first domain controller for a domain, you must specify the fully qualified domain name, FQDN. When you add a domain controller to an existing domain or forest, the wizard provides the existing domain information. Which level will you choose for the forest functional level? The forest functional level determines the forest features that will be available, and the supported domain controller operating system. This also sets the minimum domain functional level for the domains in the forest. Which level will you choose for the domain functional level? The domain functional level determines the domain features that will be available, and the supported domain controller operating system. Will the domain controller be a DNS server? Your DNS must be functioning well to support ADDS. Will the domain controller host the global catalog? This option is selected by default for the first domain controller in a forest, and you cannot change it. Will the domain controller be an RODC? This option is not available for the first domain controller in a forest. What will the Directory Services Restore Mode (DSRM) password be? This is necessary for recovering the ADDS database from a backup. What is the NetBIOS name for the ADDS domain? When you create the first domain controller for a domain, you must specify the NetBIOS name for the domain. Where will the database, log files and sysfil folders be created? By default, the database and log files folder is C:\Windows\NTDS. By default, the sysfil folder is C:\Windows\sysfil. Note, if you need to restore the ADDS database from a backup, restart the domain controller in DSRM. To enter DSRM, restart the domain controller, and then press F8 during the initial startup process. When the domain controller starts, it is not running the ADDS services. Instead, it is running as a member server in the domain. To sign into that server in the absence of ADDS, use the DSRM password. Note, Windows Server 2016 supports cloning ADDS servers. Before you clone an ADDS server, it must be a member of the clonable domain controllers group. Additionally, the PDC emulator must be online and available to the clone DC, and it must be running Windows Server 2016. Note, the Active Directory Domain Services Installation Wizard, dpromo.exe, commonly used to install domain controllers in Windows Server 2008 and earlier, is obsolete starting with Windows Server 2012.